and welcome to Storytime with Uncle Gravy. I hope you're all happy and smiling and have seen or felt a bit of the sun's warmth today. I'm going to carry on with Chapter 6. As Holly and Jake watched videos, chatted excitedly about their first campout, and the parents played cards, down at the bottom of the garden, the mood was less cheerful. Chris had shared the knowledge that had been overheard, but realised that it had actually raised more questions than it answered. Bernie was looking up at the sky and noticing that the moon was almost perfectly round, which meant that tomorrow night could be another one when it was a perfect circle. A night that would bring strange dreams and even stranger voices. And Ash? Well, Ash was pondering how big this strange hedgehog creature might actually be, and, in the way that Ash usually approached things, was hoping that it might not be too huge, could be really friendly, and wouldn't mind the Rustles using some of its spare spikes to make useful tools with. The Rustles often all had the same worries, but Ash was usually the one who tried to think of the positives. Bernie, Chris, I'm thinking, this might not be so bad. What if this hedgehog thing is like a friend we've never had? It sounds like it is on its way and we don't have a choice, so let's just all be careful and not let it hear our voice. Chris and Bernie were both hungry and were feeling a bit grumpy too, but Ash's words helped to put things into a clear and easy plan. None of them knew what was going to happen, but they quickly realised that worrying about it was just going to be a waste of energy. After sharing meeting had officially ended, Chris and Bernie walked into the brambles to pick up something to eat, while Ash made plans for the night. The moon was already very bright, and there were still some very tiny puddles left at the end of the garden, which seemed to have a picture of the moon in them. Ash had seen this kind of thing before, and knew that if a tiny piece of grass or seed was plopped into one, the picture of the moon would wobble, and then join up again, somehow. This was actually as far as Ash's plan for the evening had got, but it would be a fine thing to do, while thinking about spiky giants. Chris was now sitting on top of a tiny snail shell, chewing on a bit of sunflower seed that had been dropped earlier by a startled blue tit. Of the three Rustles, being the one that heard more, noticed more, and seemed more interested in the world around them could be very rewarding, but sometimes it also meant that questions would be asked that had no answers, or at least answers that Chris was yet to have heard. Sometimes this left them feeling like the effort to help was mistaken by Bernie and Ash as an effort just to be bossy, and that wasn't the plan at all. There were 3 tiny Rustles in the garden, with a lot of space around them, but tonight Chris felt like the space going out towards Bernie and Ash was bigger than it needed to be, and that was not a nice feeling. Still, there was plenty of food to be found. The seed that had been planted would be germinating soon. They all had shelter, and there was plenty to eat and drink too. The sky was very clear, which meant the next day would probably be warm and bright, so Chris headed back along the fence to look for an empty snail shell. Tomorrow was on its way, just like the mysterious hedgehogs, and everything would probably feel better after a nap. In the morning, Holly came down to the kitchen to find her mum and dad tidying away the last of the previous night's things. Jake and Holly had cleared away the dinner plates and bowls in a hurry to make room for the presentation, so all that remained was what had been used after the grown-ups had been left alone to play cards. As she picked up little black flat wrappers that had spots of white minty goo on them, she thought it was amazing, and a little unfair, that adults would remind children how important sleep was and to not eat too many treats, but when they got together, they liked nothing more than staying up really late while drinking coffee and eating whole boxes of chocolates. She decided not to share this thought though, as she knew that she would probably need their help later that morning after Jake had come over. The plan was to go into the cupboard under the house and find the old tent. They went camping once or twice a year as a family, so had upgraded their tent to one with 2 rooms and a porch area at the front, but the original 2-man tent was still down there somewhere. Because it was old, it wasn't as easy to put up as the newer tent, apparently, so she was wise enough to keep her parents on her side in case some supervision was needed. Holly's parents had used the old tent before she was born, and had told her stories previously about their camping adventures when they were younger. She didn't like to dwell on these stories for too long. Grown-ups were just a fixed age, and that age was just older. Thinking about them adventuring and being carefree and spontaneous was a bit weird. Holly's house was built on a slope, which meant the front of the house was much higher than the back. The garden was on a slope too, which meant that Holly's garden had 3 cupboard doors at the bottom of the house's back wall, and if you climbed inside, you were in a space almost as wide as the whole house itself. Clambering around under the house was always fun. The boxes of old baby toys sometimes prompted small, blurry memories, and cardboard books with tiny, thick pages were stored neatly in lidded plastic containers too. It seemed hard for grown-ups to get rid of baby things, which was a strange idea to Holly, but it was nice to bump into her own history every now and then. Holly crawled past the big white plastic tub with the fiddly, clippy lid that stored new camping gas stands, a stove, plastic plates, and bowls and wooden cutlery in it. The shiny, plastic, neat and tidy bag for the newer tent was there beside it, all nicely zipped up and looking full, but not too bulgy. Further on, and with signs of mouse nibbles, was an old, damp-looking, shorter canvas bag with a piece of frayed string doubled round it and tied tight. Holly reached out and dragged it towards her, hearing metal poles clank together as it got closer. The musty smell was quite strong, and she was now really glad that she had decided to get it out early in the day so she and Jake could look at it and work out how it worked before they tried to get it put together. After heaving the bag out of the underhouse cupboard, emptying it all out onto the deck now seemed to be a good idea. The day was bright and warming up, and Holly decided that getting as much air to it all would make a lot of sense. She wanted to go to Jake's house with a tent that was good enough for their plans, but one that also would be comfortable to sleep in his garden. They didn't intend to actually spend much time inside the old tent that night, but as a shelter, it would be good if it was at least a little less smelly and free of old cobwebs. Holly held the bag to her chest, walked to the decked area and placed the bag down. After fiddling for a while with the string, she decided that the knot must have melted into itself since the last time it was used, so she took a sharp stone from the gravel path and cut it open. She held the bag upright, gave it a bit of a wiggle, and once the first pole had slowly squeezed out, the rest followed with a clatter and a roll. One of the poles rolled off the side of the deck, but she didn't notice it amid all the noise. The ground sheet was next, the brown plastic bottom still tightly rolled up and protecting the fabric inside. As Holly rolled it open, tufts and blades of yellow grass saw daylight again for the first time in many years. They were soon wiped away, but as she brushed her hands over the ground sheet and touched the grass, she couldn't help but wonder where the grass had originally come from. The thought that she was kind of travelling back in time and touching little events from when her parents were younger and she didn't even exist yet was a cool mixture of strange and exciting. Holly's dad often said, "There are truly incredible things all around us, all of the time. You just have to take your time and look for them." And now she felt she would add this one to her list. Because the tent was musty and the day was warm, Holly left everything unrolled on the deck so it could freshen up a bit, and went back inside to prepare her equipment for the nighttime recordings during the camp-out. Holly had been given a smart notebook for her birthday, which had pages made of recycled paper and was bound with a leather cover. The same leather had been used to make a thin, shoelace-type fastening which wrapped round the book and made it look, in Holly's eyes, very professional. She hadn't used it yet, but tonight felt like it was the perfect opportunity to make a mark on its first page. The Rustles had all woken early that day. Saturdays were just noisy days to them. They didn't have any need for knowing the names of certain days, as it didn't make a difference to their plans. But they were aware that certain days seemed busier and had more giant activity in them. This Saturday had been no different so far, other than the smaller giant had been out in the garden a bit earlier than normal. Chris and Bernie had both seen Holly bringing the old tent bag up to the deck and pouring out the contents onto and over the side of the deck, but Ash had been elsewhere at that point. Checking the mark on the fence where the seed had been planted recently, Ash was keen to see if there were any signs of something green and tasty appearing, but had been disappointed that the soil wasn't yet parting or looking bulgy. The disappointment soon faded though. As Ash came close to the edge of the deck, which was just a huge and impassable wooden wall to a rustle, there was a bright glint through the grass. as the sun's light bounced off something. Ash was a generally curious creature at the best of times, and this was so sparkly that investigating was simply essential. Being very careful not to make too much grass move, Ash walked towards the source of the light and was a little surprised to find what looked like the entrance to a tunnel. The grass along the side of the deck was overgrown and thick and wiry, so it wasn't possible to see how far back this tunnel actually stretched. But Ash already felt it would be essential to find out. It was too good an adventuring opportunity to miss. It's bright on the outside and twinkles and dances, but inside it's black as the tunnel advances. I can't see the end, but maybe, tonight, I'll shelter inside if the moon gets too bright. Even Ash's thoughts rhymed, but they helped to remember plans or lists, and it was a nice feeling already to know that tonight's first nap would be in something other than an old snail shell. Sometimes it was good to try new things, and Ash didn't think any harm could possibly come from visiting this mysterious tunnel again. It turned out that Ash, Bernie and Chris would all be feeling quite tired by the time the sky went dark and the moon became bright, as there was an awful lot of noise and fuss in the garden that day. This meant that their usual habit of having a few tiny naps in their shells was almost impossible. Whatever the giants were doing, it was loud and disruptive, and they all had the feeling it had something to do with the mysterious hedgehogs that Chris had started to learn about. There was noise from the other side of the fence, giants talking to each other over the fence panels, and the smaller giants both coming and going from each garden. It felt like a plan was happening around them, but they wouldn't know what it was until the next day. In fact, the Rustles would find out more about the plan much earlier than that, and one of them was going to find themselves in a very strange and dangerous position. And that pause means that's where I'm stopping for today, with the hope that you want to know what happens after that pause, because that's how stories work, hopefully. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow. Take care.